Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. And today I'm going to go my review of the Great American Bash 1998. Starting off the evening, we're going to go to our first match of the night. It is Booker T versus Chris Benoit. I thought this was a great match. Back and forth matchup between Booker T and Benoit, with Benoit keeping the pace of the match. Benoit then hits a diving headbutt off the top rope on Booker T, but Booker T gets up, hits a missile drop kick off the top rope on Benoit, pins for the 3. And your winner of the match is Booker T. Hats off to Booker T for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Mortis versus Saturn. One thing I took away from, or I should say two things I took away from this match, is Kanyon uses the Mortis character as a distraction. This was actually Kanyon's pay-per-view debut. The match itself, it was a good match. Back and forth matchup between Kanyon and Saturn, with Kanyon keeping the pace of the match. The Flock make their way out to the ring. Flock then attack Kanyon. Mortis is here. Two fake Mortises end up attacking each other outside the ring. Kanyon then hits a flatliner, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Kanyon. After the match, fake Mortis then hits a DDT on Kanyon, and then the fake Mortis ends up being Raven. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the WCW Cruiserweight Championship. It is Dean Malenko versus Chris Jericho. I thought this was a great matchup as well. Back and forth matchup between Malenko and Jericho, with Malenko keeping the pace of the match. Jericho then hits a Frankensteiner on Malenko, as well as applying a Lion Tamer on Malenko, but the hold is quickly broken. Malenko then applies a Texas Cloverleaf on Jericho, but the hold is broken. And then Dean ultimately hits Jericho with a chair shot, which causes Chris Jericho to win this match by disqualification. Hats off to Chris Jericho for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Reese versus Juventud Guerrera. I thought this was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between Reese and Guerrera, with Guerrera keeping the pace of the match. Van Hammer then hits Reese with a chair shot, which allows Guerrera to go for the cover, pins for the 3. And your winner of the match is Juventud Guerrera. Hats off to Juventud Guerrera for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Eddie Guerrero versus Chavo Guerrero. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between Eddie and Chavo, with Eddie keeping the pace of the match. But Chavo ends up hitting a springboard tornado DDT on Eddie Guerrero. Pins for the 3. And your winner of the match is Chavo Guerrero. Hats off to Chavo Guerrero for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the WCW Television Championship. It is Fit Finlay versus Booker T. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between Finlay and Booker T, with Finlay keeping the pace of the match. But Booker T ends up hitting a devastating pile driver on Fit Finlay. Pins for the 3. And your winner of the match is Booker T. Hats off to Booker T for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the WCW United States Championship. It is Conan versus Goldberg. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between Conan and Goldberg, with Goldberg keeping the pace of the match. But Goldberg ultimately hits his signature jackhammer on Conan, pins for the 3. And your winner of the match is Goldberg. Hats off to Goldberg for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Roddy Piper and Savage versus Hogan and Bret Hart. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with Hogan and Bret Hart keeping the pace of the match. Hart, though, applies a sharpshooter. And your winners of the match are Hogan and Hart. Hats off to Hogan and Hart for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of the Great American Bash 1998. It is the Giant versus Sting for the WCW Tag Team Championships. The match itself, it was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between the Giant and Sting, with Giant keeping the pace of the match. But Sting ultimately hits a Scorpion Death Drop off the top rope on the Giant, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Sting. Hats off to Sting for getting the win in this matchup. A couple of things I want to say about the Great American Bash 1998 before I get out of here, man. Number one, this is a solid event. The Great American Bash is one of my all-time favorite pay-per-views, especially for WCW. They've always put on fantastic matches for the Great American Bash. It was also Dusty Rhodes' invention to create the Great American Bash. Just kind of shows you how much of a great mind Dusty Rhodes was for professional wrestling. With that being said, a lot of matches on this card, man, I actually enjoyed. Booker T versus Chris Benoit to open up the night for Great American Bash 1998. Solid matchup. Booker T ended up becoming victorious by hitting the missile drop kick on Benoit. Dean Malenko and Chris Jericho, again, solid matchup, and I've said this multiple times in the past, man. The cruiserweight division for WCW was severely underrated. A lot of the superstars that walk through that building as a cruiserweight, man, are first ballot Hall of Famers, and I really don't think Bischoff knew what he had with the cruiserweight division in WCW, because honestly, for what it's worth, I think any cruiserweight matchup could have main evented any pay-per-view card for WCW back then, with the amount of talent those cruiserweights, the amount of cruiserweights they had on that roster and the talent they had as for cruiserweights, definitely could have main evented any pay-per-view card WCW put together back in the day, 100%. Eddie Guerrero versus Chavo Guerrero, solid matchup as well. Conan versus Goldberg, decent match. Giant versus Sting in the main event. It was a solid match. And the other thing, too, I forgot to mention this, was Kanyon. For a while, Kanyon's debut in WCW was the character Mortis. And, my thing is Mortis, the character Mortis, man, they could have done a lot more with that character than what they did. But I believe this was Kanyon's actual WCW pay-per-view debut as Kanyon. And he ended up becoming victorious in that match over Saturn by hitting the flatliner on Saturn in this match to pick up the victory. But Kanyon was, again, underrated. I think Kanyon was another guy that really wasn't given an opportunity to really showcase his talent, his skills. I was a big fan of the Mortis character. I think, like I said, WCW could have did more with the Mortis character if they really wanted to, especially with, a match that comes to mind with me. And the way I would have done it is, some vignettes, some behind-the-scenes stuff, with Sting and Mortis. I think Mortis versus Sting would have been a fantastic matchup for both Mortis and Sting. I think it would have been a great storyline between Mortis and Sting, especially the character that Sting came back as, the Crow Sting, the black and white face paint Sting, and Mortis. Mortis came in as, this mysterious guy that came into the fold of WCW that was, beefing with Glacier at the time. But I think, the storyline alone, it was kind of like the storyline that they had, which, again, they could have done a lot better with, when Sting was having a great storyline with Vampiro. Some of the vignettes, the graveyard scenes, stuff like that. I mean, it was great. It was awesome. But I think they could have done the same thing with, a guy like Kanyon or a guy like, like Mortis, and have a storyline with Mortis and Sting. And I think it would have been absolutely insane to see Mortis go up against Sting. I think it would have made for a great match. But all in all, just like I do with every single one of these pay-per-views, you guys know by now, I always give these pay-per-views a rating from 1 out of 10. 1 being the absolute worst, 10 being the absolute best. I'm going to have to give WCW's Great American Bash 1998 a solid 5.5 at best. But this is my review of the Great American Bash 1998. I hope you guys are out there staying safe. Be careful, and remember, stay classic. Peace.